There's a moment in many lives when someone quietly stops asking, "What more can I achieve?" and starts asking something different. What do I actually want to spend my time on? For Audrey Hepburn, that moment came gradually in the years after her most famous films. She had by then achieved nearly everything the film industry could offer: critical acclaim, beloved roles, a kind of grace that audiences around the world recognized instantly. She could have continued. There would always have been another film, another offer, another reason to stay in front of the camera. Instead, she spent much of her later life doing something quieter. She traveled, not for premieres, not for publicity, but to visit children in places affected by famine, by war, by extreme poverty. She sat with them, held them, listened to mothers describe what their families needed, and carried those stories back to rooms full of people who could help. Those who traveled with her during this time often remarked on something striking. In front of a camera, for a film, she had always been composed, graceful, poised, exactly as the world expected her to be. But in these visits, something different came through. She would crouch down to a child's level, look them directly in the eyes, and simply be present with them, without performance, without an audience in the way that mattered to her. A colleague once described watching her sit with a severely malnourished child in a feeding center, saying almost nothing, simply holding the child's hand for a long time. Afterward, someone asked her how she managed to do this kind of work day after day, given how difficult it must be. She said something simple. She said that this was the first time in her life she felt she was using her fame for something that actually mattered. Not for herself, but for someone else. It's worth pausing here to understand what this shift actually meant for her practically. She gave up red carpets for dusty roads. She gave up film sets with their comforts and their crews for places with no running water, no electricity, often no real plan for the day beyond getting from one village to the next. By any conventional measure, this was a step down. Fewer cameras, smaller audiences, none of the glamour she had spent a lifetime being associated with. And yet, by her own account, it was the opposite of a step down. It was, she said, the first time she felt like the attention she had spent her life receiving was finally pointing somewhere useful. Not at her, through her, towards someone else. Think about that for a moment. A woman who had been in some of the most celebrated films ever made, films that decades later people still watch, still love, still consider timeless, said that holding a child's hand in a feeding center was the first time she felt her fame had truly mattered. This wasn't a rejection of her film career. She remained proud of that work and grateful for it. But somewhere along the way, she had quietly recalibrated what mattering meant to her. It wasn't about being remembered for a role, or a performance, or an award. It was about whether her presence in a given moment had made any real difference to another person. That was the realization, quiet and easy to overlook because it didn't come with any announcement. That legacy isn't really about what you're remembered for by the world. It's about what you did, quietly for the people in front of you, the ones whose names the world will never know, but who will never forget you. Maybe you've felt that too. Maybe, looking back at your own life, the things you're proudest of aren't the things that would go on a resume or in an obituary or in any kind of public record. Maybe they're smaller than that. A time you sat with a friend who was going through something hard and just stayed without trying to fix it. A time you helped a neighbor with something small and never mentioned it again. A child, your own or someone else's, who you spent an afternoon with, just being present with nothing else on your mind. And maybe, like Audrey, there's a part of you that has spent a lot of your life focused on achievement, on building something, proving something, becoming someone. And maybe now, in this part of your life, you're starting to wonder whether that's really the part that will matter most when you look back. Here's something gentle to consider. You don't need a grand platform or fame or resources to leave the kind of legacy Audrey discovered mattered most to her. What she did in those feeding centers was very simple at its core. She showed up. She paid attention. She made one person, for one moment, feel less alone. That is available to almost anyone, almost anywhere, almost every day. A phone call to someone who's lonely, a visit to someone in the hospital, an afternoon spent with a grandchild with no phone, no distractions, just attention. These moments rarely feel significant while they're happening, but they are often exactly what people remember years later about the people they loved. Audrey Hepburn's films will likely be watched for generations, but the people whose hands she held in those feeding centers, the mothers, the children, the aid workers who worked alongside her, carried something different. Not a memory of a movie star. A memory of someone who sat with them in a hard moment and didn't look away. Maybe it's time to think about your own version of that. Not a grand gesture, just a person. Someone in your life right now who could use your attention, your presence, your time. A friend who's been quiet lately. A family member going through something difficult. Someone who might not ask for help, but who would notice deeply if you simply showed up. Maybe it's time to show up for them. Not with advice necessarily, not with solutions, just with your presence, sitting with them the way Audrey sat with that child, without needing the moment to be anything other than what it was. It's never too late to redefine what matters to you. Audrey Hepburn made this shift later in her life, after decades of one kind of success. She didn't need to apologize for the years that came before, or pretend they didn't matter. She simply added something new, something quieter, something that, in the end, she said mattered more. There's a particular kind of legacy that doesn't show up in any film reel, or any award, or any headline. It shows up in the way people speak about you, quietly, years after you're gone. Not, they achieved so much, though that might be true too. But they were there for me when it mattered. They made me feel less alone. I never forgot how they treated me. If you're watching this tonight, maybe there's someone who could use that from you. Not someday, this week. So take a slow breath. And maybe, this week, let your time go toward one person. Not toward achieving anything, not toward being remembered for anything. Just toward being present with someone who needs it. That, it turns out, might be the legacy that lasts the longest. Not because the world will record it, but because the person on the other end of it never will forget. Audrey Hepburn spent the last years of her life choosing, again and again, to be present with people the world had mostly overlooked. She once said that as you grow older, you should realize that you have two hands, one for helping yourself and one for helping others. Not as a slogan, as something she had come to believe quietly through experience. If you're watching this tonight, maybe there's a hand you could offer to someone this week. Just one. Just once. It might matter more than you think. To them, and, in time, to you. There's another side to this worth sitting with, too. Maybe you're not the one who has time and attention to give right now. Maybe you're the one who's been needing it. Someone who's felt overlooked or unimportant, or like the world has moved on without you. If that's the case, this story might land differently for you. Consider this. The children Audrey sat with never asked to be seen by someone famous. They simply needed someone to see them at all. If you've been feeling unseen, it might help to remember that the people around you, neighbors, old friends, family members, may simply not know that you'd welcome their attention. Sometimes letting someone know you'd love a visit or a call is itself a gift to them too. Because most people want to be useful to someone they care about and just don't know how. Audrey Hepburn's later years remind us of something easy to forget in the middle of busy lives. That presence is rarely convenient. It usually requires setting something else aside, a schedule, an errand, a moment of rest you'd planned for yourself. But almost no one, looking back on their life, regrets the time they gave to someone who needed it. What people regret far more often is the time they didn't give, the visit they kept postponing, the call they meant to make, the afternoon they meant to set aside. If you're watching this tonight, maybe there's a small window in your week, an hour, an afternoon, even just a phone call that could become exactly this kind of presence for someone. It doesn't need to be planned perfectly. It just needs to happen. So take a slow breath and let this be the week you find out what a little presence, given freely, with nothing expected in return, can do. For someone else, and quietly, for you too.